This is a video on my approach to research. Very early, 45 years ago at undergraduate college, I read Herbert Simon's book, Sciences of the Artificial. He made the point that knowledge is increasing exponentially, so that people, professions, and degrees from universities were ever smaller fractions of the total knowledge in a field. And so we are generating ever narrower people and professionals in a world where most of our problems are cross-field and cross-function. We have virtually no tools for operating cross-field and cross-function. And we have not developed effective meta-sciences, sciences cutting across other sciences. Quality, I felt, was a meta-science that cut across all other fields. And my excellent science research project found 54 possible meta-sciences that cut across all other fields in terms of you can be the top physicist, you can be the top architect, you can be the top dancer, using any of these 54 meta-sciences or what I called excellent sciences. But at any rate, as an undergraduate, I decided to tackle this problem instead of the normal my model is righter than your model, or what I call the one righty model approach that current science requires, and that is all that journals will publish. It used to be that scientists ran around the world in the history of science categorizing and cataloging things. And they would get huge collections of variety, bring them back to a museum, and then curators in the museum would very carefully study and catalog and categorize them. And then other later people would come and try to explain that variety with causal models. We don't do that anymore. We don't do the collecting, and we don't do the cataloging and categorizing anymore, and you can't publish articles that do that. And you leap right to causal models to explain 1/100th of a field, because no one has mapped all the models of creativity out there, all the models of innovation out there. So Richard Green decided to map all the models of creativity out there rather than to propose some one model of his as righter than everybody else's model, even though nobody's even looked at the variety out there. So how can they know their model is righter unless they look at the others? Well, they use correlational statistics to validate their model, and that turns out to be a false way to validate a model. And we know that because it's extremely expensive to do, and so only a few people at Harvard, Stanford can afford it. And when they've done it and published results, the results are extremely tiny, laughably tiny. So that Amibile, the chairman of Harvard's Business School, did a creativity new environment at Procter & Gamble, the corporate new ventures program, and 6 pages of method in her article and only 1/2 of one sentence on results, hidden away at the bottom, next to last paragraph and middle of sentence. And the big result she got was the ability for them to copy a hit Japanese product 8 years later in America. Now, I call that delayed copying, not creativity. But Harvard published that as a creativity improvement for Procter & Gamble. Well, if Procter & Gamble is that miserable that that constitutes an improvement, I feel sorry for them. But I don't think they're that miserable. So I think that's really just statistically validated models give you no assurance of power or impact. And it's a delusion. And the CEOs are smart enough to know that. But if they hire a famous professor, it doesn't really matter whether their method works, because they can't be blamed, because this was the top after all. But it matters to Richard Green, and he doesn't really want his whole life to be about being a highly promoted, highly paid professor whose entire life work is laughed at by future generations because it's just no impact at all. I do want to have models of impact, but I don't think any one righty model will have impact. I do believe we have a better chance if we have huge repertoires of all the models out there, and then we look for combinations that individual creators or individual innovators or individual designers use that have high impact at certain conditions, with boundary conditions. And that's sort of the kind of research I'm trying to do. Now, the problem with this kind of research is it took huge, careful sample, 8,000 people from 41 nations and 63 professions in order to get the models of creativity that are out there. And it took 2,000 books I had to read to get the models of theory of creativity that are out there. And that resulted in 60 models of creativity, this book I published. And now what I need to do is look at which combinations of those models appear at what times and places in the work of very creative people of various sorts. And that's going to be a whole different sample and whole different questions to ask them. But we test combinations of models early in their career, late in their career, when they handle this kind of problem, when they handle that kind of problem, when they're working with this kind of colleague, when they're working with that kind of colleague. What combinations work when, why, where? And I want to do that. That's the next phase of my research.